picture yourself just sort of wandering through a local plant nursery on an aimless weekend afternoon.
Oh, yeah. We've all been there.
Right. You know the exact environment I'm talking about. The air is thick, it's a little too humid, and really the only sound is the crunch of gravel under your shoes as you pass just like row after row of endless green.
Just a total sea of foliage.
Exactly. But then suddenly, a brilliant explosion of purple petals completely interrupts your line of sight. I mean, it just mesmerizes you.
It grabs your attention immediately.
It really does. So you lean in and you assume you're just looking at a beautiful, piece of natural decoration. But you weren't.
Not at all.
You were actually staring at a highly complex, deceptive biological machine. A machine so sophisticated that it recently outsmarted a highly dedicated botanical expert with nearly 1,000 documented field notes to their name.
Yeah, the contrast between what we think we're seeing, like just at the glance, and what is actually operating right in front of us is staggering.
It really is.
We rely so heavily on superficial glances. We assume our perception is giving us the full reality of a situation when really we are just skimming the absolute surface of this hidden architecture.
Okay, let's unpack this because unraveling that hidden architecture is our mission today. We're doing a deep dive into a really brilliant dispatch from the internet. It's an excerpt from a blog called Notes on Gardening.
Specifically, Part 871.
Right, Part 871, which was published on April 19th, 2026, by an author simply known as Ang. And through Ang's spontaneous trip to a plant nursery and this sudden kind of shocking realization about their own past writing, we get to explore how one single botanical observation tells a massive story.
A really massive story.
Yeah, we're diving into biological deception, the cognitive trap of mistaken identity, and honestly, the methodologies we really need to employ to actually understand the world. So let's start with that purple explosion Ang stumbled upon.
Yeah, so what Ang spotted in the nursery was a cluster of plants in full bloom called the Singapore Rhododendron. Scientifically, it's known as Melastoma malabathricum.
Melastoma malabathricum. Wow. Yeah, quite a mouthful. But Ang points out that looking at the cluster as a whole, it gives you this immediate sense of visual power. The flowers feature 5 incredibly vibrant purple petals, which are huge, right? Like very noticeable.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
But those petals are essentially just a billboard. The true marvel of the plant-like, the actual machinery, is tucked inside the bloom in the stamens.
Right, the stamens. Just to clarify, those are the little stalks inside the flower where the pollen lives, right?
Yes, exactly. But what makes the Singapore rhododendron basically a masterclass in evolutionary engineering is that it features 2 entirely distinct types of stamens within a single flower.
Wait, 2 different types in the same flower?
Yeah. They look different, they occupy completely different real estate, and they serve entirely different functions. So let's look at the inner circle first.
Okay.
These stamens are shorter, they're completely straight, and they're bright yellow. And Ang notes that these serve a singular, highly specific purpose. They're the lure. They act as a food source for visiting insects. Ah, okay, so they stand out against that dark purple background like a beacon.
Exactly.
The plant is essentially broadcasting like, hey, breakfast is over here, come and get it.
Yep. That bright yellow is a highly visible, high-contrast target. But surrounding that inner circle, you have the outer ring. And these stamens abandon the yellow entirely.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they are purple.
Yeah.
Which allows them to just blend right in with the surrounding petals. And they're also much longer. Plus, rather than growing straight up, they're distinctly curved.
Curved? Why curved?
Well, according to Ang, this outer ring is the actual reproductive organ of the flower. That curved shape is a structural necessity. They're physically designed to perfectly sweep against the back of an insect to deposit pollen.
Okay, wait, I have to map this out visually because this is such a brilliant concept.
Go for it.
It operates exactly like a high-end nightclub.
A nightclub? Okay, I'm listening. Think about it. That inner circle of short, bright yellow stamens, that's the flashy neon sign, and the free buffet right at the front door. Its only job is to get the bugs off the street and into the venue.
Right, drawing the crowd.
Exactly. But tucked away in the shadows, blending into the dark walls, you have the longer, curved purple stamens. That is the VIP section, where the actual critical business of the establishment, the reproduction, is taking place.
That is actually a perfect analogy. The plant has engineered a highly controlled, compartmentalized environment. What's fascinating here is that it's a strict biological division of labor.
Let me push back on this dynamic for a second, though.
Sure.
Because from the insect's perspective, this feels like a scam.
A scam.
Yeah, I mean, it borders on manipulation. The insect thinks it's just showing up for a nice meal, but the environment is rigged. The door frame is secretly designed to, like, strap a backpack of pollen onto the insect while it eats. Is that really a fair trade? Or is the plant just exploiting the bug?
Well, I'd argue it is the ultimate fair trade, even if the insect is totally unaware of the terms of service.
The terms of service, I like that.
Because the currency is valid, right? The yellow stamens do provide the nectar and food the insect was promised. What you're calling a scam is actually a profound mechanism for survival.
How so?
Think about how physically fragile the reproductive parts of any flower are. If you have a large, clumsy bumblebee thrashing around blindly, just desperately tearing at the flower to find food, it could easily snap or destroy the exact mechanisms the plant needs to reproduce.
Ah, I see. So the bumblebee is the proverbial bull in the china shop.
Exactly. So the plant builds a separate cafeteria. By physically separating the food source from the reproductive mechanics, the plant protects its most vital assets.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right. It gives the insect a very clear, safe, heavily reinforced target to focus on, the yellow center. And while the insect is happily distracted, munching away at the designated feeding trough, those longer, curved purple stamens are acting almost like spring-loaded levers. Yeah, the insect shifts its weight, and the purple stamens quietly brush against its thorax. They deposit pollen well outside the direct destructive line of fire of the insect's mandibles. So the pollinator does the work entirely on the plant's terms without ever risking the delicate cargo.
It really is architectural genius. The plant is essentially forcing the bug into a specific biomechanical posture.
Exactly.
And the insect just flies off, totally unaware that it paid for its breakfast by acting as a courier.
Which brings us to, honestly, the most fascinating layer of Eng's observation. This flower is an absolute expert at managing the perception of the insects that visit it. But that overwhelming, vibrant display of purple petals and complex stamens is equally adept at deceiving human perception.
Yeah, and this is where the blog post takes such a great psychological turn. So Eng is in the middle of drafting this exact dispatch, part 871, describing the incredible biology in the Singapore Rhododendron, and suddenly hits a wall.
A huge wall.
Right. A massive realization just washes over them. They dig back into their own archives and realize they have made a significant, very public mistake.
Yeah, Eng realizes that in an older post part 841, specifically, they had completely misidentified a plant.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they published an entry believing they were looking at the Singapore Rhododendron, but it was an entirely different species, the glory bush.
The Latin name for the glory bush being Tibucina erviliana.
Exactly.
And the plot thickens here because Eng had actually written about the glory bush even earlier, back in part 793. So we aren't talking about some novice who just didn't know any better.
No, not at all.
Eng knows both plants. They have meticulously documented both plants. And yet, when confronted with one in the wild, their brains still just mash them together. And Eng openly admits why. At a superficial glance, their flowers are remarkably similar.
Very similar.
They both throw out these giant, vibrant, five-petaled purple blooms.
And this is a textbook example of how our cognitive heuristics operate.
Or shortcuts, right.
Exactly. The brain is incredibly energy intensive, so it is constantly looking for shortcuts to save processing power. When presented with a dominant, striking feature like a massive purple flower, the brain locks onto it.
It just zeroes in.
Right. We see the purple, we see the petals, and our brain quickly searches its database, finds the closest match, and just auto-completes the rest of the form. Oh, Singapore Rhododendron. We stop actively observing. We allow a surface-level similarity to completely override structural reality.
We let the neon sign blind us to the rest of the building.
That's exactly it. But the illusion instantly shatters the moment you force yourself to look past the flower. Eng points out that if you actually examine the foliage, the differences between the two plants are undeniably clear.
So what are we looking at then?
Let's look at the shape of the leaves. They both share lanceolate leaves, that classic spear shape, wider at the base and tapering to a sharp point. So the silhouette is roughly the same. But that is where the overlap ends. The leaves of the glory bush have highly specific characteristics. They're covered in fine hairs, they're noticeably darker green, and they feature distinct white edges along the border.
While the Singapore rhododendron leaves are completely lacking that hairy texture, right? And the dark coloration and the white trim, none of that is there.
Exactly. And the differences scale up even further when you look at the fundamental architecture of the plants. The growth habits are entirely divergent.
How so?
Well, the Singapore rhododendron is an erect shrub. Its biological imperative is to grow vertically, reaching straight up, but the glory bush is a sprawling shrub. It grows horizontally, sort of spreading outward across the space.
So erect versus sprawling, smooth versus hairy.
Yep.
When you actually map it out, they share almost nothing in common except the color of the coat they wear.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, though. It's the context of the author. I mean, this is Notes on Gardening, part 871. 871 posts of meticulous, documented observation.
That's years of work.
Right. Ang is a dedicated enthusiast, likely a total expert. And yet, the brain's desire to take the easy way out still bypassed all that experience.
It perfectly illustrates what Ang calls a classic case of botanical mistaken identity. It doesn't really matter how robust your database of knowledge is, you are always susceptible to the brain's default setting.
Which is to make a snap judgment based on the loudest visual cue in the room.
Precisely.
I am incredibly impressed by the intellectual humility Ang demonstrates here. I mean, think about the ego involved in writing a public blog for years.
Oh, for sure.
You're creeping up on post 900. You realize you completely botched a basic identification 30 posts ago. The temptation to just quietly log in, stealth edit part 841, change the tags and pretend it never happened, that would be overwhelming for most people.
I think most people would absolutely do that.
Yeah. But instead, Ang centers the mistake in the new post. They write it right into the permanent record. I was wrong. I got distracted by the petals.
That kind of transparency requires a deep, deep commitment to the truth of the subject matter over the protection of one's own ego.
It really is the defining trait of a true learner. You can't expand your understanding of the world if you're constantly defending your flawed perceptions. You have to be willing to look at your own work and say, I only saw the flower, and I completely missed the plant.
And what elevates Ang's realization from a simple apology to a highly practical methodology is the next step.
Right.
Ang doesn't just confess the mistake and move on. They engineer a system to ensure the cognitive shortcut never overrides their observation again. They create this rigorous new protocol.
A framework for future observation.
Exactly. Ang states that from this point forward, whenever encountering an unknown species, they will force themselves to capture 3 distinct photographs.
Okay, so a single snapshot is no longer acceptable.
Right. First, a picture of the flower. Second, a picture of the leaves. And third, a picture of the overall growth of the plant.
The 3-picture rule. Flower, leaves, overall growth.
I love that. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, if we pull this out of the garden and apply it to how we process information in our daily lives, this 3-step methodology is a brilliant defense against the constant barrage of information overload we all face.
Oh, let's test that out.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean if we apply the 3-picture rule to something like reading a scientific study or a piece of breaking news?
Let's see.
The flower is clearly the headline. It's the sensational abstract. It's a single data point designed to hook your attention and just get you to stop scrolling.
Yes. And as we saw with the glory bush, the headline can be completely misleading if you view it in isolation. It promises a reality that the underlying structure might not actually support.
Right.
So you're forced to take the second picture, the leaves. In our information analogy, the leaves are the methodology, the texture of the argument.
Like, what was the sample size? What are the p-values?
Exactly. You're looking for the hairy surface and the white edges, the nuanced supporting evidence that differentiates the specific claim from something that merely sounds plausible on the surface.
The actual substance behind the flashy petal.
Yep.
And that brings us to the 3rd picture. The overall growth of the plant. If the flower is the headline and the leaves are the methodology, the overall growth has to be the systemic environment.
A broader context.
Right, like who funded the study? What is the historical context of this conflict? Does this data exist in an erect, upward-reaching ecosystem of peer review? Or is it a sprawling, horizontal mess of unverified claims?
That's a great way to put it. You cannot definitively categorize a plant or an idea or a policy or a person unless you zoom out far enough to observe its structural reality in the wild.
Ang concludes the post by noting that the devil is always in the details.
Yeah.
And it sounds simple, but in a hyper-connected, fast-paced world, we're basically sprinting through a nursery filled with millions of bright purple flowers.
We really are.
Every notification, every hot take, every viral video, it's a giant purple petal just screaming for our limited attention. And because our brains are trying to save energy, we usually only snap that first mental picture. We categorize the headline instantly, assume we understand the whole organism, and we just keep running.
We allow the neon sign of the yellow stamen to dictate our reality. Meanwhile, the actual mechanisms of the situation, the quiet, curved purple stamens, are operating entirely unseen in the background.
Totally.
Eng's three-picture rule is essentially a manual override for our brain's default settings. It demands that we slow down, investigate the texture, and examine the broader context before we claim to possess the truth of what we're looking at.
Let's retrace the path we just took, because we covered a lot of ground today from a very simple starting point.
We really did.
We began with an aimless walk in a plant nursery, zooming in on the Singapore Rhododendron to find this highly orchestrated biological nightclub. You know, an inner ring of yellow stamens serving as a free buffet to lure in pollinators, while an outer ring of camouflaged, curved purple stamens handles the vital, delicate work of reproduction in the shadows.
The VIP section.
The VIP section, exactly. And we explored how the plant's deceptive visual power tricked not just the insects, but a dedicated enthusiast like Ang, who publicly confessed to confusing the rhododendron with the glory bush simply because they both sported the same purple coat.
Right.
And finally, we followed Ang's journey from that public mistake to the creation of the three-picture rule, that profound mental framework demanding we look past the flower, analyze the leaves, and understand the overall growth before we make a judgment.
And this raises an important question for all of us. What details are you glossing over in your own life because you're only looking at the bright purple petals of a situation? The transition from superficial observation to structural understanding, that is really the core of everything we discussed today.
It is. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to offer one final, slightly mind-bending concept to mull over.
Oh, I'm ready.
We have spent this entire conversation analyzing how Ang had to drastically adjust their perspective to capture the whole truth of the plant.
Right.
They had to step back, examine the horizontal spread of the branches, inspect the tiny hairs on the lanceolate leaves, and put the taxonomy into context. That is the human truth of the Singapore rhododendron.
Okay.
But consider the insect for a moment. Think about the pollinator that lands on that bloom.
Right. The bug at the buffet.
Exactly. To the insect, the truth of that exact same plant is fundamentally different. To the bug, it is not a beautiful flowering shrub. It is certainly not a lesson in cognitive heuristics or a metaphor for critical thinking.
No, definitely not.
To the insect, the absolute truth of the plant is simply a bright yellow food source and a slightly annoying purple hurdle that brushes against its back while it eats. That is its entire, complete reality.
It's the concept of the umwelt, right? The idea that an organism's unique sensory capabilities define its universe. The plant exists, but the reality of the plant changes completely depending on who is doing the looking.
Exactly. It forces you to wonder, when we look at any complex system in our lives, whether it's a piece of breaking news, an intricate scientific study, or even the people we interact with every day, how much of our definitive truth is really just based on what we are specifically wired to extract from them?
That's a deep thought.
So are we seeing the whole plan? Or are we just a bug staring at a yellow buffet, completely missing the larger machine?
Wow.
So the next time a bright flash of color catches your eye, remember to look closer. Take all three pictures.